young friend, young old friend, and chants all the great things he's done. I think most of them are attributable to the summer that he spent at BPI. You agree with that, Chance? So, what Kari has asked me to do today is kind of overwhelming. He wanted me to talk about the history of the Fair Housing Act in Chicago, especially, and including Martin Luther King's work on it. He wanted me to talk about the control case, secondly, and thirdly, he wanted advice for advancing fair housing and incorporating social justice principles into one's work, a big challenge. So what I'm going to do, he said I should talk for about 30 minutes, and then we have Q&A afterwards. So I'm trying in the 30 minutes to do the first two things he mentioned, the history of the Fair Housing Act, how we got where we are today, especially vis-a-vis Chicago and Martin Luther King's role in it in Chicago. And secondly, a brief overview of the control case and what's going on in control. And then on that third stuff about how we do social justice incorporated into our work and so on, we're going to do that in the Q&A part, if that's all right. I rely on Chance for his questions on that. So, that's okay, and I assume you can hear me because I haven't seen any hands. I'm going to start. You have to excuse me because I got to compress so much in such a short amount of time that this fellow allotted me. So I'm going to use a few notes. On the history of the Fair Housing Act. Well, after 240 years, and I should say one other thing preliminarily. I'm going to focus mostly on African Americans vis-a-vis the Act. The Act covers other protected classes, so-called, as well. But our biggest challenges in this country, historically speaking and currently, are African Americans, and so that's going to be my focus. Okay. After 240 years of slavery and 80 more years of sharecropping and Jim Crow, with the exception of just a few aborted years of Reconstruction in the South, where were African Americans in America on the eve of World War II, from the beginning down to 1940, 320 years? Well, on the eve of World War II, most African Americans still lived in the South, and most were still in virtual servitude. A lot of detail about that. I just give you two illustrations symbolically representing the reality of servitude in the South for most African Americans as recently as 1940. Lynching went on, thousands of them, from the end of the 1900s right down to World War II. And the federal government could not get an anti-lynching law passed. Franklin Roosevelt, because he was under pressure from the Southern segregationists in Congress, refused to support the bill, and we never had a federal anti-lynching bill in all those years. And symbolic of the reality of lynching, there was a cartoon, I think it was in the Saturday Evening Post, of a young mother holding up her daughter to see better in the crowd, the black man hanging from a tree, and she's saying to her neighbor, this, pointing to her little daughter or infant daughter, this is her first lynching. So when I say conditions of virtual servitude lasted up until the First World War, I'm not speaking hyperbolic. Beginning with World War II, there were some small changes. First of all, the Great Migration. A lot of African Americans began to leave the South. Although 1.75 million had left the South before the Depression, then during the Depression there wasn't much movement. Over 5 million more African Americans moved to the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West in the years beginning with 1940, with the World War II. The Hitlerian ideology, racist ideology, made it